Okay, today we're going to learn about using a pen and ink. It's a really simple technique. I'm going to talk about first the parts of the ink pen. I'm going to break down where everything is, what they're all called, and how to use them. Then I'll show you guys techniques for mark making using the pen and ink, and then I'll show you how to clean up and take care of your equipment. A pen and ink is broken down into two parts. This is the handle, and this is called a nib. The handle has a little shaft and the nib fits right inside of it, just like that. You'll notice the nib has several different parts to it. There's a stainless steel part and then a brass part, and there's a gap in between the two. So if I focus here for a second, you'll see that gap in between the brass part and the stainless steel. This is called the ink well. That's where the ink goes. And based on the principles of surface tension, that liquid will not fall out of that little channel. The ink then flows down this little gap in between the two. That's called the ink channel and goes down into the tip. Now, pen and inks, the nibs all have different tips. And you'll notice this one says B5. This is a style B, and it's a number 5. The ratings of the nibs are as follows. You have the different styles, A, B, C, and D. A, let me show you that. A style nibs have a square at a 45-degree angle from the nib. B style nibs have a circle at a 45-degree angle. C style are just flat. So they're just flat squares. You guys can see that. And D is an oval. Now, the numbers, a number 0 is the largest size. A 1 is slightly smaller, 2 slightly smaller. It goes all the way to 6. 6 is the smallest D-style nib. You're going to end up finding that a C6 is your best friend because it is flat and it is very, very tiny and going to give you a very, very fine. To load ink in the pen, you're going to need the bottle of India ink and or an eyedropper bottle. Now I've pre-filled this eyedropper bottle with ink from the India ink bottle. Please be careful because this is permanent ink. It's going to make a big mess if you spill it. So take your time, get all of your stuff ready and set first. Contrary to popular belief, to load the ink pen, you're not going to sit here and dip it into the ink bottle like some scribe or writer from the 1800s or 1700s with the little feather ink pens. What you're actually going to do is you're going to get the eyedropper and squeeze out a little bit of ink into the channel, that ink well that I told you about, making sure that when you're done, you're going to need a scrap piece of paper to tap gently to get out some of that ink and start the ink flowing through the pen. Okay, once that happens, then I can go on my paper and I can start making my marks. You got to be careful not to press too hard, because then what's going to happen is if I press too hard like I did here, all the ink just spills out onto the page, and I'll show you guys that. These larger nibs are going to initially let out a lot of ink, and what you kind of do almost is you're almost pulling the ink that's already on the page off into other areas. You want to be careful when you load your ink to never load the ink over the page that you're drawing on. That's nice. You always want to do it over your scrap piece. So that's obvious, but there's a lot that you have to consider when you're doing this, because you are fighting gravity. This ink is fighting gravity, and so you'll notice I just spilled because I squeezed a little too hard with this. Also, if you shake this pen and you turn it, it's going to drop ink. If I press too hard, it's going to let out too much, though it's actually working pretty nice right now. And again, once you get it working nice on your scrap, then you can go over to your new sheet, the piece that you're actually working with, and you can draw. That's my biggest piece of advice for working with this. Now that you got the basics down, it's time for mark making. I'm using a C6 nib right now, and I'm going to start by drawing sideways, creating a crosshatch technique. Now you'll notice I knew that was going to happen because there was too much ink built up on the tip. If that ever happens, you got to get it off the paper and dab it off before that happens. This is going to take practice. This is not something that you learn overnight. You will figure it out, and if you do make mistakes, the biggest thing I can tell you is just roll with it. That mistake I'll turn into something. There's my simple cross-hatching technique. Line proximity technique. You're getting lines farther apart. You'll notice I'm moving the pen sideways. If you press it very gently, it's going to make a thinner line. If I go over here and press it a little bit darker, it's going to make a thicker line. You have to be careful with this. You might be hearing right now the paper scraping. That's because these pen nibs are very, very sharp, so you want to be careful that you don't press too hard or you'll scrape the paper away. When you go to wash these out, when you're done using the pen and ink, you need to use a toothbrush to actually get in between the inkwell and that brass piece to clean it completely out. I like using soap and water, so I'll put soap on my toothbrush and really get it clean. You want that stainless steel and the brass to be shiny like new. You don't want to let ink dry on it, because then it messes with the surface tension and the ink doesn't quite move down that ink channel and work as well as it would if it was totally clean. So please make sure you're cleaning these out completely and totally to make them shiny and like new as immediately as you can after you're done using them. Dry them with a paper towel and you're done.